The European Union is locked in an economic war with Russia.
Специальной военной операции.
Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the EU has implemented 10 rounds of sanctions in an effort to cripple Russia's economy. Russia, on the other hand, counted on Europe's large dependency on its energy exports to blackmail it into abandoning its support for Ukraine. Yet, a year onwards, Russia's plan failed and the European Union has managed to narrowly avoid a recession. But it hasn't been without heavy consequences to the European economy and industry, which have dealt with eye-watering energy prices. This is all happening at the time of a new era of economic competition with China, but also the United States, during which Europe is trying to reindustrialize. So how did Europe manage its incredible feat, and how is this going to affect its long-term economic competitiveness? This video was sponsored by Brilliant, and made possible thanks to InterEurope's Patreon supporters. Before we get into the consequences, we need to understand how Europe defeated Russia's energy weapon. Europe managed to weather the energy squeeze in two main ways: by reducing its gas consumption and by replacing gas from Russia with energy imports from elsewhere. Let's start by diving into the reduced consumption. Over the course of 2022, Europe's consumption fell by 13%. And if we look at the numbers, it achieved this thanks to three main levers. The first is the growth of alternative energy sources. Coal and renewables allowed Europe to replace gas by a whopping 8%, though this effect was negated by the terrible year in hydro and nuclear, resulting in a near 0% change in consumption from electricity production. Second, Europe was lucky when it came to the weather, which reduced consumption by 3%, on top of which households reduced consumption by a further 2%, as a result of higher prices. And then there are the significant reductions made by industry, which increased its efficiency, switched fuel, but ultimately limited their output, resulting in an additional 4% decrease. On top of its reduced consumption, the EU managed to replace a lot of the gas it previously received from Russia thanks to three main things. The first is that the EU was able to substitute a lot of the gas by importing more LNG from the United States, Qatar, and Nigeria. In fact, the US doubled its exports to the European Union over a single year. Then, through what I would call creative accounting, with Russian LNG falling outside of sanctions, Russia still made up 13% of the EU's gas supply, down from 50% a year earlier. This figure is likely higher if you consider that the EU imported Indian and Chinese gas, most of which actually came from Russia. On top of this, Europe was lucky, yes, I know again, that China had still not fully reopened, which meant there was lower demand on international markets for LNG. So yes, through all these mechanisms, Europe managed to find enough gas and reduce demand by enough to make it through the last winter. And due to the lower gas demand, gas reserves are actually filled enough to avoid most problems in the next winter. However, the high energy prices have resulted in negative impacts for the European economy, all of which left European companies and consumers much poorer, shrinking the size of the economic pie. The high energy prices significantly decreased the competitiveness of European firms whose imports and then products became more expensive compared to the rest of the world. Then, as a result of paying top euro for energy, there has been a significant outflow of money from Europe, or lost value in the European economy to the benefit of energy exporters like Russia, Qatar, Algeria, and the United States. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde called this lost money, saying that Europe could not fully recover the income that the euro area has paid to the rest of the world and the ensuing loss of output. This in turn led to sky-high inflation as prices rose to reflect the higher cost of production and of inputs. As a result, European consumers experienced a fall in purchasing power, leading to a 5% drop in standards of living. At the same time, many European companies' profit margins took a hit by not passing on the increased energy prices onto their consumers. And over the past couple of months, firms and workers have been competing over who would get the remaining pie. But the firms have been winning this competition, such that recently the European Central Bank called out European firms for raising prices beyond the actual price increase of inputs. This could have been way worse. Consumers and businesses alike were sheltered from the height of the energy crisis with 800 billion euros in government spending packages, which has managed to limit the shock by subsidizing energy. But now that the aid is slowly winding down and with European competitiveness has taken a permanent hit. If you remember this graph from early on in the video, the way Europe shrank its industrial gas demand was in part by reducing production. But European companies didn't reduce production across the board. In fact, Germany's industrial output actually grew slightly in 2022. But growing overall output hides the fact that energy-heavy industries like ammonia and aluminum production suffered heavy losses, reducing capacity by close to 70% or even shutting down completely during the crisis. Europe substituted the production of these things with cheaper international imports, which allowed its economy to continue functioning. For example, European aluminium imports from China nearly doubled between 2021 and 2022. But is Europe recovering from this energy crisis? Well, the lower energy prices has meant that many of Europe's fertilizer and ammonia plants are switching back on. And thanks to government support, Europe avoided what could have been a bloodbath for its industry. However, due to the continued uncertainty, companies are increasingly looking to set up shop elsewhere. Germany's chemical giant BASF announced that it was permanently downsizing in Europe to focus on the Chinese and American markets. And several European aluminium smelters, which are the most energy-intensive plants out of heavy industry, have shut down permanently. It simply has become less profitable to operate or invest in Europe's industrial production, simply because shipping gas is more expensive than receiving it from a pipeline. And that is unlikely to change in the future. On top of this, Europe faces severe headwinds in the face of the United States Inflation Reduction Act, a massive subsidy program which aims to kickstart its clean energy industry to avoid depending on China. In fact, some have called the IRA an escalation of the subsidy race between the US, China, and the European Union. As a result of this package and Europe's higher energy prices, the cost of producing batteries in the US is now much cheaper than in Europe and on par with China. The US risks drawing the investment and businesses that Europe hoped to develop itself. And this threatens to throw a wrench in Europe's plans to reindustrialize through its signature piece of legislation, the Green Deal Industrial Plan and the Net Zero Industry Act. The European Union aims to produce 40% of all its batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, and electrolyzers on the continent, to reduce European dependence on the rest of the world. All of these things are energy intensive, expensive, and as you might have guessed it, they need to be underpinned by the very heavy industry that the energy war with Russia has crippled. According to this analysis by ING, Europe would need to increase its aluminium consumption by roughly 25% by 2030 to keep up with the demand of the energy transition. This leaves Europe and the European Union in an incredibly tricky situation, having to deal both with what will likely shape out to be an incredibly expensive subsidy race into clean tech, which many doubt it can win, while facing the severe handicap of high energy prices that cripple the heavy industrial base needed to sustain it. This leaves Europe with a choice: reindustrialize while facing incredibly strong headwinds, or create new dependencies for Europe. And it seems that European countries are already making up their minds. To preserve its competitive advantage, Europe seems headed for a golden age of subsidies for its industry. To restart some of the shut-down capacity, governments have started directly subsidizing them to keep them alive. But even doing that is a challenge, considering the limited ability of the European Union to formulate a united response. And one country, Germany, has announced its intention to subsidize up to 80% of the cost of energy for its heavy industry. But what do you think? Can Europe stay competitive in the future? Will Europeans be willing to pay the price of keeping their industry alive? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Europe is faced with unprecedented challenges in the fields of science, technology, and energy, with major implication on its place in the geopolitical pecking order. As a result, we've never needed more educated young people who understand STEM to push for progress and change. And that's why you should check out the courses on Brilliant.org. Brilliant not only allows you to brush up on your basics, starting with arithmetic, you can make your way all the way up to university-level knowledge in topics like physics and maths, and the numbers behind neural networks. Thanks to thousands of incredible lessons, you can build up your fundamentals to understand chemistry and the conservation of energy, which are the basic principles behind any energy system. With their engaging and informative courses, you'll be able to learn about these subjects in a way that's both fun and effective, and develop the skills and understanding needed to effect change. And better still, the first 200 people to sign up using the link in the description will receive a 30-day free trial and 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support. If you like this video and haven't already, I would invite you to watch this video about Europe's nuclear civil war, or this video about the future of the North Sea as Europe's largest energy power plant. This was Into Europe. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for the latest updates and analysis on European news. And if you would like to support the channel, feel free to check out the Into Europe Patreon.